Welcome to the Roberts Law Office Injury Podcast. Kentucky attorney Jeff Roberts has over 25 years of experience. He'll provide answers to your questions related to personal injury and automobile accidents, workers' compensation claims, and Social Security disability benefits. Let's join Jeff for this episode. Friends, welcome back. We're back in the studio with attorney Jeff Roberts down in Calloway County. Jeff, how you doing?
I'm doing good, Jim. How are you today?
Buddy, I'm excited to be back. Today I want to talk about, if you don't mind, what happens in a car wreck or a motorcycle accident where the passenger, let's focus really on the passenger or multiple passengers. Normally when we talk about car wrecks, we always talk about the driver, but let's take this conversation from the passenger side as far as, okay, how do they get their injuries, taken care of? Where do they start? How does that go? In a previous episode, we've obviously talked about Kentucky being a no-fault state, and so we have personal injury protection, also called PIP coverage. Why don't you kind of unpack that first and how that would relate then to the passenger?
Sure. The PIP coverage or no-fault coverage under Kentucky law, basically it follows the vehicle that you're in. And what that means is the vehicle you're in is responsible to pay the PIP benefits, which is the first $10,000 of medical and or lost wage benefits. There's other things it can be used for as well from there, but that's usually what you see PIP used for is medical and lost wage benefits. And the coverage can be higher than $10,000. No policy written in Kentucky can write less than $10,000 of PIP coverage. So someone can purchase what's called added reparations benefits or added PIP and have higher limits than $10,000. And that applies to every person in the vehicle.
So they don't have to split up that $10,000.
They do not have to split up that $10,000. Everybody in the vehicle has $10,000 of coverage. So if you're in a suburban type vehicle and you have 7 people in that and all 7 have injuries that require medical treatment, then all 7 have $10,000 of that coverage under the car insurance. And even if the situation where it's very clear that the other driver is the one at fault doesn't matter on this. It's the vehicle you're in. And that came about back in the 70s because what you were seeing, and I have to say what I was told you were seeing because I wasn't practicing law back in the 70s. But what was occurring is anytime there was a dispute as to who was at fault, then neither car insurance would pay the medical bills. And so people weren't having medical bills paid from that standpoint. So they come up with the no-fault law that said, we're not going to worry about fault on getting medical bills and lost wages covered. If you're in this vehicle, then this is the one that's going to pay for those benefits up to this limit. Now, later on, if it's determined that the driver of the vehicle you're in was not at fault, then the at-fault party's insurance would reimburse the driver's insurance for what they had to pay out in PIP from there. So it eventually does fall back on the at-fault driver and their insurance company if there's only solely one person at fault in the accident, instead of being the responsibility for the insurance company for the vehicle you're in that setting.
Now, for PIP to apply, though, that assumes the driver of the car has insurance, which is Kentucky law.
Correct.
What happens if they're driving uninsured?
If they're driving uninsured, the driver of the uninsured vehicle then does not have any PIP coverage. They can't get it. If you're driving or if you have a vehicle that's uninsured and you're injured in that, then by the fact that you're driving uninsured, you lose your ability to recover PIP. If you're a passenger, though, then of course, obviously, you're not responsible for making sure the vehicle is insured in that setting. So if you're a passenger in a vehicle, then you have access to PIP coverage through what's called an assigned claims plan in Kentucky, which is basically, it's kind of set up to cover that situation for passengers in an uninsured vehicle. And essentially what they do, you make a claim to the assigned claims plan, and then they assign that claim on a rotating basis among the different insurance companies that write policies in Kentucky, so then it gets assigned, and you actually do, as a passenger, can still recover PIP benefits in that standpoint. And then if you have your own vehicle that has added reparations benefits, you have the ability to potentially have more than the 10,000 as well, and could possibly recover from your own insurance for those benefits.
And again, the reason you want to have this access to coverage is so you have access to medical care should you need it. I mean, that's the nice thing. You don't have to wait for this case to get figured out or resolved. You have at least $10,000 sitting there to enable you to go to the ER to start getting some treatment and to move on from there. So, I mean, that's a nice thing under Kentucky law, actually, this whole PIP concept.
Correct. That is the benefit of that. And whenever anybody who's been injured in a car accident or even a work injury, a lot of times, whenever you go to the doctor, if your health insurance gets a bill for that, and it's the type of injury that is normally occurs from an injury instead of a disease or something of that nature, you'll get a letter from your insurance company saying, is somebody else responsible for this injury and at fault in causing this, so that you have a claim? And if so, then your insurance sometimes can, with workers' comp and even with at fault sometimes, or car wreck sometimes, you can have them balk at paying, at least until they know that the PIP benefits have been exhausted. So that's one of the things that people say, well, I have the health insurance. Health insurance may balk at paying in that setting if they think somebody else is really responsible in primary for paying the medical bills instead of them.
And I guess in a way you can't really blame them. I mean, if there's another source of funds to cover that first initial 10,000, we'll go use that before we have to come in and get involved.
Yes, and that's what they try to say. Now, I usually reserve that, and in Kentucky you can reserve the PIP benefits to go toward my client's lost wage benefits. We've mentioned this multiple times. I strongly encourage people to have short-term disability and or long-term disability benefits, but most people don't, and they don't have any type of recovery for lost wages if they're in a car wreck and they're out of work because of that wreck. And so I usually reserve that to cover my client's lost wages, and then when my client's back at work, whatever money's left over, we'll start paying medical bills at that point in time.
Right, and that's, again, one of the advantages of having an experienced personal injury attorney there. You know how to deal with the situation. You've done it 100 times, 1,000 times. I mean, you've been down this road. But if this is a car wreck, and especially if I'm just a passenger, I may have a lot of questions. And again, that's why you're here.
True, and that's the benefit of going to an attorney who does personal injury practice and who limits their practice to a personal injury practice. In Kentucky, as we've also mentioned previously, but in Kentucky does not. You don't specialize in an area of practice when you're practicing law. I've been doing personal injury work since 1992. I've never handled a divorce case, but my license allows me to do divorce cases. I've never handled a capital murder case. I prosecuted cases, but not a capital murder case. But I've never, so on a criminal defendant that wants to come to me on a capital murder case, technically I can handle that case. I wouldn't know what I was doing and how to properly represent the person because I've never done that before. And it's the same with with attorneys on car wreck cases. Any attorney in Kentucky can handle a car wreck case, but some attorneys don't have the experience to know the so-called tricks of the trade from that standpoint, and so they may. I've got cases where I've reserved that 10,000, even didn't use it for lost wages, but reserved the 10,000 and let health insurance pay the bills and convinced health insurance to pay the bills, and we knock out $30,000 of medical bills with the 10,000 PIP by reimbursing health insurance 10,000 because we benefited from the health insurance contract to pay at a reduced rate, and PIP does not pay at a reduced rate. It pays 100%. So, an attorney who and I'm not the only attorney that does that. Attorneys who do.
You're one of my favorites, though.
I'm married, Jim.
That was not a pass.
One of see, I threw myself off even with that one. To say, well, we all try to throw. We always try to throw the other one off during these, and I threw my own self off. Attorneys who do this for a living, personal injury work for a living, do car wrecks day in day out, like I do. Know how to do that as well. So, but that's one of the things that you need to do when you're looking to hire an attorney is to see what kind of experience they have before you make that phone call. Because if the person's primary experience is doing domestic relations, criminal defense,
Probate,
bankruptcy, there's nothing wrong with that from that standpoint. And they know that area of law better than I know that area of law. So I'm not talking bad about any attorney when I say that, but they may not be the best person suited to handle your car wreck case.
It's a question of experience.
Correct.
Yeah,
absolutely.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Let's transition to a different topic. So, if I were to pull my automobile insurance card out, it's going to have some numbers on there, and it may say something like 50, 250, or it may have some other numbers on there, and that talks about coverage limits. Again, from a passenger's perspective, what should I really know and understand in terms of how much insurance is really there?
Yeah. Well, when you look at your insurance policy, a lot of times you will see what you normally see is if somebody's got 25,000 of liability coverage, then it'll say 2550. If they got 50,000, it'll say 50,100. Or 100,000, a lot of times say 300,000 from there. And it's called split coverage, but what that means, or at least that's what I refer to it, and what that means is that any individual person that is injured can receive that lower dollar figure. That's the policy limits for one individual. So if it's a 50-100 policy and you're a passenger in the vehicle, you could receive up to 50,000 of bodily injury liability from that liability coverage there.
So that could be the 10,000 in PIP plus another 50?
Correct.
To cover my medical bills.
Medical and other damages,
Other damages, right.
From that standpoint. But that insurance is not going to pay any more than $100,000 per accident. So if you're in a vehicle, and we'll use it as for ease of talking, a single vehicle collision, and there are 3 passengers in the vehicle. Well, the driver was at fault since it's a single vehicle.
I fall asleep, I run off the road. It's a single car collision.
Correct, single car collision. And so you're a passenger in that vehicle, you're injured, and the other 2 passengers in the vehicle are also injured. The insurance company is not going to pay any one individual more than $50,000. They're not going to pay any more to all 3 of the individuals injured, any more than $100,000. So if all 3 people have 50,000 of damages, then they've got to split that 100,000 in some form or fashion because the insurance is not going to pay any more than 100,000. Now you have a potential to say, I don't want the liability limits. I'm going to pursue the claim against the at-fault driver and go to try to collect from the at-fault driver and collect from their own personal assets, as well as once the trial is over with, you would get the liability limits at that point. But the likelihood of being successful in that, you can if the person is wealthy, but if the person's wealthy, they're also going to have much better than 50,000, 100,000 limits on their vehicle in that setting. But if the person has any kind of assets whatsoever, instead of paying you the jury verdict, they're going to pay $1,000 to a bankruptcy lawyer and go bankrupt that jury verdict, and you're probably not going to collect much more, if anything more than what the insurance limits are.
Right, not to mention the additional time involved and the efforts involved to try to hopefully get there.
Correct.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. So at some point, is it the insurance company or is it the attorney representing the passengers who decides how that $100,000 is divided up, say, between the 3 people? I mean, somebody's injuries may be less severe than somebody else's, So maybe it's not equitable. It's not 33, 33, 30, or whatever that number
Right.
is.
And I've been involved in those cases multiple times, actually. And what generally occurs is the attorneys representing the passengers will talk among themselves to see if they can reach an agreement, and then talk to their clients to see if their clients are in agreement with that, because it's not going to be final until all the clients would agree to it. And if all the clients agree to it, then you settle the case with the insurance company. They pay the limits, or the each individual based on how you've agreed to divide it up. If the injured parties cannot agree on how it's to be divided up among themselves, then you can have it. A lot of times the insurance company will pay it into the court and let the injured parties then fight among themselves over it. You can. What you'll see sometimes in that is they'll bring in a third party, a mediator who is an impartial third party that doesn't represent any individual person, normally an attorney in that setting, who's familiar with personal injuries, and that person would talk to the different parties to try to reach an agreement on what is a fair and equitable settlement of those funds. And if you reach it that way, then you divide up according to that. And then if that doesn't work, you have a trial and let a jury decide how it's divided up.
So it can be once again a longer process, but I mean that's
A longer and more expensive process.
Yeah,
So
and-
you're
and that's
eating
the
up
law.
some of the costs from that standpoint.
Yeah,
So,
that makes a lot of sense.
yeah.
There's another policy that we usually see in automobile policies anyway, called UIM, uninsured motorist and underinsured motorist coverage, and we've talked about that in a previous episode. And
Right.
I'll link to that in the show notes, obviously. So if you're interested in what that topic is, if you're listening to this, I'll make it really easy, and I'll give you a link back to that as well. But Jeff, in the case of a passenger, once again, what is UIM, and then how does it play out for the passenger?
Underinsured motorist coverage is what it says. It's to cover damages when the at-fault driver that caused the collision is uninsured, or if one of the at-fault drivers is uninsured. Underinsured is when the at-fault driver's insurance is not sufficient to cover all the damages. So if you have a policy that's a 5,100 and the injured party's damages are in excess of $50,000, then that driver's underinsured. He doesn't have enough insurance coverage to cover all of the damages. And then the injured party, then, if they have underinsured motorist coverage available to them, can look to that insurance policy on their own personal policy or on the policy of the vehicle they're in to recover underinsured motorist coverage for the additional damages that they received.
And that was going to be one of my questions too. As a passenger, even though I may have my own car insurance, if I have uninsured or underinsured, I do have an option of possibly pulling that in, even though my car was not involved in this collision, correct?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
And alternatively, I could also turn around to the driver of the car I was in to say, okay, the at-fault driver didn't have enough insurance, so hopefully you have uninsured or underinsured coverage.
Correct.
And I'm going to go there first, maybe.
Correct. Normally, it is first. Now, the policy, you have to read the policy language because it can be.
And they're all different, right?
Yeah, they're all
carrier
different.
To carrier.
Yeah, from carrier to carrier. So it could be a situation where even though you're not in your personal vehicle's policy is worded such that it would be the primary and the vehicle you're in would be secondary. Now, frankly, most insurance companies write their policies to try to make sure they are secondary from there, because they just seem to be further down the line as they can, so they have to pay less out from there. But you got to look at the policies to see what they say to determine who is primary, who is secondary from that standpoint. But as a general rule, it's going to be the vehicle you're in's underinsured first. Then, if you have a secondary underinsured policy, it's second. And uninsured and underinsured is different than liability from the standpoint that if you have multiple vehicles insured and you're paying a premium for underinsured motorist coverage or uninsured motorist coverage for each vehicle, then you can stack all of that coverage.
So that puts a tremendous amount of insurance available for you.
Yeah, it could. But so yes, if you have 3 vehicles and you're paying underinsured motorist premiums for 50,000, 100,000 coverage, split policy on the underinsured motorist coverage for all 3 vehicles, then that instead of 50,000 of underinsured, you stack that and you have 150,000 of underinsured motorist coverage available to you in that setting.
Wow.
Now, if it's a per policy premium, so that you got 3 policies, but you're only paying 1 premium for underinsured, and it's not associated with any specific vehicle, then you're not going to be able to stack. You're just going to get that one limited coverage because you're only paying for 1 policy of underinsured.
Okay, that makes more sense. That's more clarity.
Yeah.
Let me come back to at this point really a slightly different topic. So I'm a passenger in the car, and we've been in a collision. At what point should I get my own attorney and possibly have to, I guess, go after the driver of the car I was in? I mean, does this happen often, and how does that work?
It can, and that's whenever you're involved in a collision and you're a passenger, then you've got to look at the collision. A lot of times people don't want to go against the driver, and you're really going against the insurance company, not the driver, personally.
So if it were a family member driving, I may have those emotional, well, I don't know.
Exactly. And you don't have to recover anything greater than the limits. I mentioned earlier, you can refuse to accept the limits. You can go against the person personally for their assets. You don't have to do that, and it rarely does occur, to be honest. So if it is a family member, you're just going against the insurance company for the limits. You're not going to, a wife isn't going to go for the personal assets of her husband from a car wreck case. Maybe in another setting, but not in a car wreck case setting. From that standpoint, so you've got that. So you've got to look at it, and the attorney representing you has to look at it from the standpoint of did the other driver could be at fault in causing the wreck, but also the driver that you're on the vehicle you're in could be at fault. And frequently, when a wreck happens, there's more than one person at fault in causing the wreck. One person may be driving in excess of the speed limit, another person may have turned left in front of the person and didn't yield the right of way, and so both of them are somewhat at fault for causing this collision. So that can occur and does occur frequently. So the passenger would have a claim in that setting, would have a claim not only against the driver of the other vehicle, but against the driver of the vehicle that they're a passenger in.
And that comes back to the premise of pure comparative fault, which is, I guess, part of Kentucky's system, right?
Right. Kentucky has pure comparative fault, which just basically means that if you are 1% at fault in causing the collision, then you're responsible for 1% of the damages to the injured party. And if you're 99% at fault, you're responsible for paying 99% of those damages. So if the person, and let's use a different example or a different percentage, but say one driver is 25% at fault, one driver is 75% at fault, the passenger can't say, well, the driver that's 75% at fault is the vehicle I'm in. I don't really want to sue them. I just want to sue the other driver. They cannot sue that. They can sue the other driver, but they cannot recover more than the percentage of fault apportioned to that other driver. So if they've got $100,000 of damages and the other driver's 25% at fault, they're only recovering $25,000 from that other driver, and they're just giving up the other $75,000 of damages by not pursuing against the driver of the vehicle they're in that was 75% at fault.
Well, and as you said earlier, and I was glad to hear you say that, you're not suing the other person, you're suing the other person's insurance company. And I think emotionally that's an important distinction.
It is. Now, and I tell people this all the time because they tell me I don't want to sue so-and-so, and I explain that to them that your claim technically is against the other driver or the driver, the person themselves. And if we filed the complaint in circuit court, it's going to list the driver's name as being sued, not State Farm Insurance or Allstate Insurance. It's going to be the driver's name. But The attorney is going to be hired by the insurance company. The damages are going to be paid by the insurance company up to the policy limits from that standpoint. So the at fault drivers' insurance premiums may go up because they had a wreck that they were at fault in. But frankly, the fact that they had a wreck that they're at fault in is what's causing their insurance to go up, not you're pursuing the claim against them. And one thing I frequently get asked about underinsured motorist coverage and uninsured motorist coverage is, I don't want to go against that because it's going to raise my insurance premiums up.
Because that's really a policy that you pay for yourself.
Yeah, that's a policy that you're paying for out of your pocket. A lot of times anyway, if you're a passenger, it could be the driver of that vehicle. But in Kentucky, they cannot raise the premiums because you accessed underinsured motorist coverage when you weren't at fault in causing the accident. So your premiums aren't going to go up or should not go up, and Kentucky law would prohibit that. They may go up because premiums went up because costs go up type situation, but they can't raise it because you pursued an underinsured motorist claim.
A lot of people have trouble with that, thinking, wow, why should I file against my own? But again, if you have a house and you have a homeowner's policy and the storm rips off your roof, you're going against your own insurance policy to get the roof repaired.
Right.
It's the same kind of concept. It's just now we're dealing with a motor vehicle.
Well, agreed. And then, I've had a lot of people make that comment, and it's, there's a couple of responses I have to that, and that is, first off, you've incurred these damages. If we pursue against the at-fault party, which we can do, they're going to bankrupt anything above their liability limit, so we're not going to recover that money. You've actually paid money to your insurance company for this coverage. Your insurance company accepted that money with the understanding that if you're in the situation you're currently in now, they're going to pay you for being in that situation, and they've taken the premiums to do that. And it's your ultimate decision. But why would you pay premiums for coverage and then say, well, I know I have that coverage, but I just assume State Farm keep that $100,000 instead of give that $100,000 to me.
You'll get the calendar that year. They'll send you the calendar.
They'll send you the calendar that year, exactly. And then I've talked to some that make the comment about the premiums going up. And if I didn't do what I do for a living, I would have the same thought, to be honest with you, from there. But I've had people who've had claims that were $100,000 and when they say that, and I said, well, you're looking at getting $100,000 from your personal insurance. Your premiums may go up $50 a year. They're not going to because you're using underinsured, and it shouldn't. But even if it did, it goes up $50 a year. It takes a lot of years to pay $50 to make up that $100,000. Number one. Number two, if it does go up and you don't like how it goes up, go talk to Farm Bureau, go talk to State Farm, go talk to Progressive, and look at getting and see, is it going up because insurance are just going up all over, or are they really trying to backdoor in a premium rise when they're not supposed to? But you're going to be to the good by pursuing the claim as a general rule.
I would think so.
Yeah.
One of the things in the very outset, I had mentioned, this has to do with car and motorcycle. Let's in the last few minutes that we have here, let's go back and talk about motorcycles real quickly. PIP is a little different on motorcycles, but as it relates to a passenger, where does that leave them? In Kentucky law, I guess the motorcycle doesn't come with that $10,000 of PIP, right?
PIP coverage is not mandatory coverage on a motorcycle, so and a lot of drivers don't have PIP coverage.
Yeah, it's expensive
on motorcycle. A lot of times you'll see, a motorcycle have passenger PIP, and all that means is a passenger on the motorcycle has PIP coverage. The operator of the motorcycle does not have PIP coverage from there. So if that's the case, then the passenger can recover the PIP from the motorcycle at that point. And if there's no PIP coverage on it, you can be in a bad situation because a lot of car insurance policies, you go to look at that and there's not they're going to say we don't write for vehicles we don't own.
There's an exclusion.
Yeah,
there.
exclusion if
Yeah.
you're operating a motorcycle
makes-
or something. So
And again, friends, if you're listening to this, we recently did another episode, a podcast episode on motorcycles, and I'll put a link in there as well. So if you want to go back and hear some of the nuances and some of the technicalities of dealing with the insurance issues as it relates to a motorcycle, it'd be an interesting listen, to be honest with you.
Right.
Okay, so now with do motorcycles cover UIM? I mean, do they have that on their policies?
you can purchase that on those
Okay.
policies as well. Now, the underinsured is a required
Right.
coverage.
Right.
Uninsured is not required at all for any vehicle in Kentucky, a car or motorcycle. But most policies have that. A lot of times UIM are kind of a combined
Right.
premium on there. And they have to offer it on a car, and you say, no, I don't want it from that standpoint. So, but you can purchase UIM, and PIP and all of that for a motorcycle as well.
Okay. So as a passenger, I mean, there's a chance that the driver actually has that kind of coverage, so I may have availability of funds and coverage for my injuries.
Absolutely.
In that road. And then as a passenger, I also have the opportunity of going after the at-fault driver, the car that maybe hit the motorcycle that I was on as a passenger. I still had that just like a normal car.
Right. And if the motorcycle, the one operating the motorcycle was negligent, you have the liability claim against the motorcycle as well, which they have to have the liability coverage.
So the motorcycle really kind of mirrors the automobile policy, and that whole conversation is pretty similar.
To some extent, except there may not be the PIP coverage available in that setting. Yeah.
All right. Well, friends, I hope you found this interesting. Again, these are discussions that we try to have, and you could read a blog post or watch a small video, but I think being able to listen to an in-depth conversation probably adds a little bit more context to it. And Jeff, if there's one thing I take away from every one of these conversations is, daggone, that sounds complicated, and it's a good reason to get in touch with an experienced attorney and to really kind of let them run the ball here, because again, that you do this every day, whereas this may be my first car wreck or it may be my first motorcycle accident, and in that situation, I may have more questions than I have answers, and that's why I need to call you guys.
Exactly. And you call in my office, I'll try to answer every question that you have. Normally, the very first meeting I have with a client, the very first meeting I have a client in regard to a car accident is always, the initial consultation is always free. But when I talk to the client, and I'll go through a variety of different things with them about their specific situation. But before the client leaves, I've always asked the client, do you have any additional questions, anything else that you got concerns about, questions about, and try to answer every one of those before they walk out of the door. Even if they don't hire me, I try to make sure I've answered every question that they have before they leave my office.
And Jeff, if somebody wants to get in touch with you today, what is the best phone number for them to use?
The office phone is 270-753-0053 or 1-800-844-5108 is a toll-free number if you're outside of Western Kentucky and want to use the toll-free number from that standpoint. And you can always reach us on that number during business hours. You can email me at jeff@jeffrobertslaw.com as well, and get in touch with me that way. And even on my website, there's a chat function on there, and whenever you use that, the people who monitor that will send me an email shortly after the conversation's over with, and that has that conversation on it and lets me know that you've reached out there, and then we will contact you back as soon as we can after that.
Outstanding. Jeff, thanks very much for your time. And friends, if you've been listening to the episode, once again, I hope it was insightful. I hope it was helpful. And I want to thank you for your time as well. Well, that's a wrap for today's episode. We'll be back in a couple of weeks with the next episode. So stay tuned. We'll be coming back.
Thank you, Jim.
See you, buddy. Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to the Roberts Law Office Injury Podcast. Jeff will return in 2 weeks. Until then, he invites you to visit jeffrobertslaw.com and follow his firm on Facebook. At the Roberts Law Office, you'll find a history of small town service and big city results.